Fort Polk's early morning heat was already suffocating, even before the sun had fully climbed over the Louisiana pines. The air smelled of damp earth, diesel, and the faint metallic tang of sweat. Soldiers from multiple units milled about the training grounds, some jogging laps, others hauling equipment or performing drills. The steady rhythm of boots on asphalt was punctuated by the occasional bark of a drill sergeant or the clang of steel hitting steel. Among the chaos, Chief Petty Officer Ryan Cutter stood with his arms crossed, a figure of taut confidence. He had a reputation that preceded him, a career SEAL, decorated, feared in training circles for his unrelenting standards and sharp tongue. Cutter had seen strength in many forms, but he had a soft spot for testing the limits of those who dared to underestimate themselves. And today, he spotted someone unusual. Corporal Tessa Morgan. She was compact, just under 5'8" lean, with tightly coiled muscles and eyes that seemed calm even in the chaos. Her uniform was immaculate, her boots spotless despite the mud already caking the training yard. There was no hesitation in her movement, no trace of the typical rookie uncertainty Cutter had come to recognize instantly. But what caught his attention most wasn't her composure. It was the aura of quiet strength she exuded, something that made the men around her unconsciously step aside. The rucksack sat in the center of the bay, a monstrous steel-gray bundle packed with fins, weighted plates, breather rigs, and comms gear. Close to 120 pounds, the kind of load that separated ordinary soldiers from those considered elite. Cutter's gaze lingered on Tessa, his lips curved into a sardonic smile. "Think you can lift that, Corporal?" His voice cut through the morning chatter, clear and commanding. The bay went silent, heads turned. Some soldiers smirked, others whispered, sizing her up with that familiar mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Tessa's eyes flicked to the rucksack. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. Her hands moved to her hips, tapping the edge of her belt before folding neatly in front of her. "I don't think," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "I know." Cutter's smirk widened, amused and slightly annoyed at her confidence. He had seen a lot in his career. Very few stood their ground against him, fewer still impressed him on sight. "Go ahead," he said, motioning to the pack. "Show me what you've got." Tessa bent at the knees, her fingers gripping the heavy straps. The entire bay seemed to hold its breath as she squared her shoulders, tensing every muscle. Cutter, leaning casually against a crate, crossed his arms, expecting a struggle. The moment she lifted the pack, a ripple of disbelief shot through the onlookers. The straps dug into her palms, the metal plates pressed against her chest, but her posture remained perfect. Inch by inch, the 120-pound monster rose. Cutter's confident grin faltered. "Holy," muttered a private nearby. Tessa didn't even flinch. She held the weight steady, balanced, controlled. She turned slightly, adjusting the pack over her shoulder as if it were nothing more than a duffel bag of towels. Her breathing was measured, quiet, almost serene. Cutter's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, curiosity replacing his initial amusement. "Not bad," he admitted, though his voice carried a challenge. "Most guys strain just to get it halfway off the ground." Tessa looked him square in the eyes, a hint of defiance in her calm gaze. "Is this all you got?" The bay erupted, some in laughter, some in incredulous whispers, but Cutter felt something stir deep in his chest, a mixture of admiration and unease. He wasn't used to being caught off guard, not by anyone, and yet here was someone who had just done something he considered impossible. For a moment, Cutter thought he saw the faintest tremor in the weightless confidence she projected, but then it was gone, replaced by the same unshakable composure that had first caught his attention. He studied her, the set of her jaw, the tension in her forearms, the way her core engaged as she held the load steady. It was discipline, yes, but it was also instinct, honed over years of challenges he couldn't yet imagine. The soldiers whispered among themselves, speculating. "Must have been a farm kid," one said, "or a wrestler." Another added, "No way someone that small can do that without cheating." Cutter ignored them. He had a sense that her strength wasn't just physical. It was the kind that came from experience, from surviving situations most men her age couldn't even comprehend. He had seen warriors like that before, men and women who had learned to push beyond pain and fear because the alternative wasn't acceptable. Tessa lowered the pack and set it gently on the ground, barely bending her knees. She looked at Cutter and offered a small nod, her gaze steady. Done. Cutter took a deep breath, impressed despite himself. All right, Corporal, you've got my attention. But even as he spoke, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. Something about her presence, the raw intensity of her focus, made him realize that he had just met someone who could challenge more than just his authority. He watched as Tessa walked away, not cocky, not seeking praise, simply moving with purpose, as though lifting the pack had been a routine part of her day. Cutter's eyes followed her, a strange mix of professional curiosity and personal intrigue simmering beneath his calm exterior. Most soldiers, he thought, would have needed a moment to recover. Most would have staggered, sweating, complaining. Not her. She made strength look effortless, but he knew better. He knew the kind of force required to lift something like that wasn't a trick. Later, as he watched her interact with other soldiers, offering quiet instructions, helping a teammate adjust his pack, Cutter realized something unsettling. She wasn't just strong. She was capable of far more than anyone here, including him, could imagine. And in that instant, a seed was planted. A question Cutter couldn't shake: who is this woman? Where did she come from? He didn't know the answer yet. But he knew he had to find out, and that he was about to be drawn into a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about strength, courage, and survival. Because Tessa Morgan wasn't just carrying a pack. She was carrying the weight of a past that no one here could yet see. And Cutter had just unwittingly stepped into her world. The bay went quiet again, the whispers fading. Everyone could feel it, the tension, the curiosity, the sense that something extraordinary had just happened. And Cutter, the seasoned SEAL, the unshakable force of discipline, realized for the first time in years that he didn't know what was coming next. All he knew was one undeniable truth: Corporal Tessa Morgan was unlike anyone he had ever met, and he had a feeling the world was about to find out why. The Louisiana sun rose higher, burning off the lingering morning mist, and with it came the relentless rhythm of training at Fort Polk. Soldiers pushed through obstacle courses, hauled heavy equipment, and ran laps under the watchful eyes of drill instructors. But for Chief Petty Officer Ryan Cutter, nothing in the sprawling training grounds captured his attention like Corporal Tessa Morgan's quiet presence. After witnessing her effortless lift of the 120-pound SEAL rucksack, Cutter couldn't stop thinking about her. He had seen the weight strain most men to their limits, yet she had carried it as if it were nothing. Not only that, she had done it with precision, calm, and confidence. There was something about her, something that didn't belong in the neat, regimented world of Fort Polk. Later that day, Cutter observed her during other exercises. She moved with a grace that seemed almost predatory. Tractor tires flipped as if they were filled with air instead of rubber. Ammunition crates were dragged without pause. She climbed ropes with an unflinching determination that made even seasoned soldiers blink. Every motion was calculated, every breath measured. "You've got to be kidding," muttered a private, watching her maneuver past an obstacle that had left men groaning and clutching at splintered wood. Another whispered, "She's like a machine." Cutter's curiosity only deepened. Machines, he knew, could be programmed, but Tessa Morgan's precision, coupled with raw instinct, suggested something far more organic. He needed answers, though he didn't yet know which questions to ask. Later, during a break, Cutter approached her while she sat on the edge of the obstacle course, tapping her wrists. The sun highlighted the tight line of her muscles under her uniform, the kind of definition born from years of hard work, not gym selfies or morning calisthenics. "You ever think about trying out for something bigger?" Cutter asked, his tone measured but probing. Tessa didn't look up immediately. Her tape ripped slightly as she tightened it around her wrists, the movement precise, almost ritualistic. "Doors don't open for people like me," she said quietly. Cutter raised a brow. "Maybe you just haven't kicked the right one yet." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment he thought she might dismiss him entirely. Instead, she exhaled, leaning back on the edge of the obstacle, the sun catching in her dark hair. "My strength," she said, almost as if confessing a secret, "wasn't born in the gym. It was born somewhere else, somewhere harder." Cutter leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Where exactly?" Tessa's gaze drifted to the horizon. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, it was with a quiet intensity that seemed to carry years of hardship. "Montana," she said. "Ranch life. Hay bales, early mornings, winter nights. You lift weight when you have to, or you watch your family crumble." Cutter nodded, sensing there was more than just rural grit in her story. "You've always been alone in this." She hesitated, her hands gripping her knees. "My father died when I was 12. I raised my younger brothers after that, worked 2 jobs just to make sure we had food. There wasn't time for fear. There wasn't time for weakness." Cutter felt a rare tug of respect mixed with unease. Most soldiers she encountered would have been hardened by training, yet Tessa's resilience was forged by life itself, by survival, responsibility, and necessity. Her strength wasn't an attribute, it was a lifeline. "You've been carrying weight long before that pack," Cutter remarked, nodding at the rucksack still sitting against the obstacle. She gave a faint smile, the first he had seen. "And you know what?" she said. "It never really felt like weight when it was my life on the line." Her words lingered between them, heavy and unspoken. Cutter realized she wasn't just physically capable. She was emotionally resilient in a way that most soldiers only pretended to be. Before he could respond, a sharp alarm pierced the air, loud, urgent, and unmistakable. "Training accident, collapse, multiple injuries." Cutter's heart sank. He and Tessa didn't hesitate. They bolted toward the source of the alarm, the morning heat replaced by adrenaline. Dirt and dust swirled as they approached the half-collapsed obstacle tower. Shouts, screams, and the groans of trapped soldiers filled the air. "Beam too heavy," a soldier yelled, panic rising in his voice. Cutter's instincts kicked in. "Get me bodies on this now." Dozens of soldiers rushed to help, but the beam didn't budge, not an inch. A medic shook his head, fear etched across his face. "If we don't lift it soon, they're gone." Cutter's jaw tightened. He had seen training accidents before, and he knew all too well that some of them ended in death. But what happened next would defy everything he had ever expected. Tessa stepped forward. "Move," she said. Her voice was calm, commanding, unyielding. The soldiers froze. Cutter tried to interject. "Morgan, this isn't." "Move," she repeated, and just like that, hesitation fell away. Men moved aside almost instinctively, giving her space. Tessa positioned herself under the beam, boots planted firmly in the dirt, arms braced, wrists taped. She inhaled deeply, her chest rising, every muscle taut. Cutter watched, his pulse quickening as she coiled herself like a spring ready to release. And then she lifted. It was impossible. The beam rose, trembling but steady. Inch by inch, Tessa held the weight above her as medics and fellow soldiers pulled the trapped men to safety. Cutter felt his hands clench, a mix of awe and disbelief coursing through him. By the time the last soldier was free, Tessa's arms shook violently, her breathing ragged but controlled. Cutter lunged forward, helping her steady the beam as it fell back to the ground safely. The dust settled. Silence hung in the air, heavy and electric. No one spoke immediately, as if they were afraid of breaking the fragile, awestruck spell she had cast. Finally, Cutter found his voice. You just did what I've only seen maybe twice in my career." Tessa dropped the weight carefully, almost reverently, and wiped her palms on her uniform. "It wasn't about showing off," she said softly. It was about making sure they got out alive. Cutter's gaze lingered on her, realizing he had underestimated her, and underestimated the kind of strength that could not be taught in a gym or earned through medals. This was survival, distilled into human form. But before he could speak further, a crackling voice came through the radio. "Command wants both of you, now urgent." Cutter exchanged a tense glance with Tessa. Her dark eyes, still focused, betrayed nothing, but he could see the flicker of curiosity, the same intensity that had drawn him in from the moment he saw her lift the pack. Whatever awaited them at command, Cutter knew one thing: this was just the beginning. Because the weight Tessa carried was more than just physical. It was history, it was trauma, it was survival, and the story behind it was far from over. And for Cutter, stepping into her world meant stepping into the unknown. A world where strength, courage, and instinct weren't just tested, they were demanded. And in the humid Louisiana morning, as dust still hung in the air, Cutter realized something he hadn't admitted in years. He wasn't just curious anymore, he was invested. He wanted to know her story. And he had a feeling that story would change everything. The dust hung in the air like a choking fog, clinging to every uniform and streaking across sweat-slicked faces. Cutter and Tessa arrived at the training yard moments after the alarm had sounded, boots crunching over gravel and scattered debris. The obstacle tower, a familiar structure to all who had trained at Fort Polk, was now a twisted heap of broken beams, bent steel, and crumbling plywood. 3 soldiers were trapped beneath the fallen crossbeam, their shouts muffled by the weight of the structure. Panic rippled through the nearby soldiers. Some froze, unable to act. Others scrambled with adrenaline-fueled determination but no clear plan. Cutter dropped to his knees beside the first soldier, shouting instructions. "Get the medics. Now, clear this area." His voice was calm but carried the authority of someone accustomed to chaos. Tessa didn't hesitate. She sprinted forward, weaving past stumbling recruits and broken equipment, assessing the scene with a precision that cut through the fear. Her hands hovered briefly over the edge of the beam, calculating leverage and force in an instant. "Step back," she commanded. Even Cutter paused, watching as her eyes narrowed. "We can't risk them under this for another second. Someone's going to get hurt if we don't act fast, and if we're smart, we'll move together." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. None dared challenge her. Something in her stance, in the sheer confidence she exuded, demanded obedience. Cutter caught himself studying her technique. She wasn't just strong, she was surgical, almost instinctively understanding how to manipulate weight and angles to maximize force. Cutter barked, "Positions, we'll lift together, on my count." Tessa crouched beneath the beam, rolling her shoulders, tightening her core. She inhaled deeply, and Cutter could see the almost imperceptible shift in her body, the way every muscle was preparing for strain. The first attempt failed. They lifted, the beam barely budging, and then it dropped back with a resonant thud that sent a shiver through everyone. Cutter's mind raced. If they didn't get it right soon, the trapped soldiers' chances would diminish with every passing second. "Again," Cutter said, his voice a mix of urgency and encouragement. He knew every second counted. Tessa's eyes met his briefly. No words were needed. She adjusted her footing, planting her boots deeper into the dirt, elbows tucked, wrists flexed for maximum leverage. Then she lifted. It wasn't just a lift. It was a feat of sheer willpower. The beam rose slowly at first, then stabilized, hovering as if suspended by some invisible force. Tessa's arms trembled slightly, but her core held steady. She didn't speak, didn't complain, didn't even sweat beyond what the Louisiana heat demanded. She was a conduit of raw, controlled power. Cutter felt his heart rate spike. He had seen extreme physical feats in his career, men and women trained to perform beyond normal human limits, but this was something else. This was the intersection of desperation, instinct, and survival. "Pull them out," she shouted once the beam had risen high enough. Medics and soldiers quickly scrambled, dragging the trapped men from under the oppressive weight. Every second felt like an eternity. Cutter's mind raced as he checked each soldier's condition. Minor cuts, scrapes, but all alive thanks to her. When the last soldier was pulled free, the beam wobbled. Cutter lunged forward, ready to catch it, but Tessa held it steady for a moment longer before gently letting it fall back to the ground. The soldiers were silent, staring at her with a mix of awe and disbelief. Cutter finally exhaled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "You just did something I've only seen once or twice in my career," he said, voice rough with a mixture of relief and amazement. Tessa's breathing was heavy now, chest rising and falling rapidly, arms shaking slightly. But her expression was calm, almost serene. She wiped a hand across her brow and looked at Cutter. "It wasn't about showing off," she said softly. "It was about getting them out alive." Cutter swallowed, realizing the depth of what had just happened. She wasn't performing for recognition. She wasn't seeking praise or admiration. She was acting out of instinct, out of a moral code forged long before she'd ever stepped foot on a training base. He looked around at the other soldiers, many of whom were still in shock. Whispers carried across the yard. "Did you see that? She lifted the whole thing herself." "No way." Tessa straightened slowly, her hands falling to her sides. Cutter noticed the faint tremor in her wrists, the subtle weariness in her eyes. Even a soldier forged by hardship had limits, and she was pushing past hers with a quiet ferocity that made his chest tighten. "Corporal Morgan," he said, stepping closer. "You just saved lives. You've got to understand this isn't normal. You've got something extraordinary." Her gaze met his. There was no pride, only a calm acknowledgement of what had been done. "Extraordinary," she said, almost questioning. "Or necessary?" Cutter paused, considering the words. In his world, extraordinary often came with accolades, medals, and recognition. Necessary came with survival, with decisions made in split seconds where lives hung in the balance. Before he could respond, a crackling voice came over the radio, urgent and commanding. "Cutter, Morgan, command wants both of you. Now, urgent, over." Cutter exchanged a glance with Tessa. Her expression didn't change. She didn't flinch. But there was a flicker, a spark of curiosity, of awareness that Cutter recognized. She was ready to face whatever came next, even if she didn't yet know what it was. They jogged back toward the command tent, weaving through the chaotic aftermath. Soldiers were checking on one another, medics rushing past with first aid kits and stretchers. Debris from the collapsed tower littered the ground, splintered wood, bent steel, and the scattered contents of training packs. Cutter's mind raced. This was more than an accident. Something about the way the beam had fallen, the tension in the supports, the timing, it didn't feel natural. He kept it to himself, watching Tessa, nodding the way her eyes scanned the debris, calculating silently. She was calm, composed, yet something in her movements betrayed years of instinct, honed by survival rather than formal training. Cutter realized she had been tested by life in ways that no obstacle course or physical drill could replicate. And in that moment, he understood that the woman standing beside him was not just another soldier. She was a force, a problem solver, a survivor. The command tent came into view. Officers and staff were already gathered, tense expressions etched on their faces. Cutter and Tessa stepped inside, and the weight of authority, urgency, and expectation pressed down on them instantly. A senior officer, Commander Hale, looked up from a stack of reports. "Good work out there," he said, though his eyes betrayed concern. "But we have an issue. Preliminary reports suggest this may not have been an accident." Tessa's chest tightened slightly, but she remained composed. Cutter's jaw clenched. He had suspected as much. The way the beam had fallen, the failure points, the sheer improbability, it all pointed to tampering. "Tampering?" Tessa asked, her voice low but steady. Hale nodded. "We'll need both of you to assist in the investigation. And Cutter, His eyes met hers briefly. "And Corporal Morgan, be prepared. This isn't going to be straightforward." Cutter felt the familiar adrenaline spike. Tessa, for her part, simply nodded, her expression unreadable. But Cutter noticed the subtle tightening of her fists, the faint narrowing of her eyes. She was ready. Whatever had caused the collapse, whether sabotage, incompetence, or something else, the soldiers' lives depended on discovering the truth. And Cutter knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tessa Morgan was the only person he had ever met who could not only survive what was coming next, but thrive in it. As the dust from the training yard continued to swirl outside, Cutter and Tessa exchanged a brief glance, unspoken understanding passing between them. They were about to step into something far bigger than any obstacle course, and the real test of strength, courage, and instinct was just beginning. The weight they carried now wasn't just steel and wood. It was knowledge, responsibility, and the chilling awareness that someone on the base, someone close, might have been willing to let soldiers die. And in that silent understanding, a tension settled over them both. The collapse wasn't an accident. And the person responsible. They were still out there. The operations tent at Fort Polk was heavy with tension. Dust from the collapsed obstacle tower still clung to the soldiers' uniforms, and the faint metallic scent of sweat lingered in the air. The atmosphere was far removed from the organized, disciplined environment of the training grounds. Here, decisions had weight, and the consequences could be deadly. Commander Hale, a tall man with a square jaw and eyes that missed nothing, stood at the head of the table. Cutter and Tessa entered briskly, both still catching their breath from the events earlier. Hale's gaze swept over them with the authority of someone who had seen too much to be impressed by ordinary feats, but even he could not hide the flicker of surprise as he glanced at Tessa. "You saved lives today," Hale said, his voice steady but edged with gravity. 3 soldiers were trapped under a collapsing beam. By all accounts, they wouldn't have survived without your intervention, Corporal Morgan. Tessa shifted slightly, keeping her gaze low. Praise had never been comfortable for her. She had been trained to move efficiently, decisively, without seeking recognition. "I did what had to be done," she said quietly. Hale nodded, unoffended by her humility. "And that's exactly why we're here. We noticed more than just your physical capability today. Your focus, your assessment of the situation, your quick decision-making, it's extraordinary. Cutter, you saw it firsthand. Isn't that right?" Cutter's lips pressed together briefly, then he nodded. "Yes, sir. Her strength isn't just physical, it's situational. She reads the battlefield the way a predator reads prey. Calm, precise, efficient. I've seen very few operators, SEALs included, act with that level of instinct under pressure." Hale turned back to Tessa. "We've been considering candidates for a joint special operations evaluation program. It's selective, integrated, the kind of operation that requires not just strength but endurance, intelligence, and adaptability. We think you might be one of the few who could succeed." Tessa blinked, caught off guard. Her life had been about survival, about proving herself day by day, not about programs or accolades. I don't know what to say," she murmured. Hale's eyes softened slightly, though the weight of authority never left his posture. "You don't have to say anything yet. What you did today speaks louder than words. But consider this. What you've shown isn't just talent, it's potential. And we need people who can operate at this level, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and strategically." Cutter stepped closer, his tone lowered just enough for Tessa to hear. "It's bigger than you think. This isn't about training. This is about proving you can handle situations most people can't even imagine. Doors like this don't open for everyone, but they do for people like you." Tessa shook her head. "I'm not special forces material. I'm not like you or your men. I don't have the background, the pedigree, I'm just me." Hale's gaze hardened slightly. "People who think they're special wash out first. People who know their limits and push past them, that's who survives. That's who succeeds." She hesitated, silence stretching across the table. Cutter leaned slightly forward. Morgan today proved something. You're capable of things that most only dream of. And right now, there's a door open to something bigger than Fort Polk, bigger than your past. You either step through it or stay behind. Tessa's thoughts drifted for a moment. The training yard, the collapsed tower, the trapped soldiers, she replayed it all in her mind. Her life had been about survival, about carrying the weight of her family and her responsibilities long before she ever thought of heroics or programs. And yet, something in Hale's words struck a chord. She began, then paused. The tape on her wrists felt tight. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. Cutter watched silently, sensing the internal struggle. Tessa was a survivor, yes, but she had always fought battles on her own terms. Hale leaned in slightly. You have nothing to lose, Corporal, only potential to gain. And with someone like Cutter at your side, someone who knows your capabilities, the path forward isn't easy, but it's possible. The quiet in the room was heavy. Tessa's gaze dropped to the table, tracing the scratches and dents on its surface. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, more intense than any rucksack or steel beam she had ever lifted. This wasn't about proving herself to anyone else. It was about proving it to herself. Cutter finally broke the silence. Don't think about what you can't do. Think about what you can do, and you just did more than anyone here thought possible. For a moment, Tessa's eyes flicked toward him, a faint spark of acknowledgement. She remembered the times in Montana, raising her brothers, hauling hay, surviving the cold winters and fending off challenges that felt impossible. This was a different kind of challenge, but one she recognized. Before she could speak further, an officer burst into the tent, urgency in every movement. "Sir, we have a problem." Hale's eyes narrowed immediately. "Explain." "The injured soldiers. Their accounts suggest the collapse may not have been an accident," the officer said, voice shaking slightly. Tessa's chest tightened. Her calm exterior remained, but inside her mind raced. She had already sensed something about the beam, the way it failed, the improbability of the collapse. And now confirmation. This wasn't a random accident. Hale's jaw set. "Then we need to find out who's responsible, now." Tessa swallowed, sensing the shift in the room. The offer, the potential path forward, suddenly carried an extra weight. She wasn't just deciding whether to pursue elite training. She was stepping into a situation that could be dangerous, unpredictable, and deeply personal. Cutter looked at her, his tone low but firm. "Morgan, whatever you decide about the program, you need to know this. If someone caused that collapse intentionally, they're still out there. And if they think they can get away with it, they're wrong. We need you. I need you." She finally looked up, eyes locking with his. The faint flicker of doubt that had lingered was replaced with focus, determination, and recognition. She had faced impossible odds before, personal, physical, emotional. And now she would face this challenge. "I'll do it," she said, voice quiet but unwavering. "I'll take the slot." Hale nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll start assessments immediately. But Cutter." His gaze shifted toward Tessa with the kind of intensity reserved for mission-critical matters. "We also need to find out what caused the collapse before anyone else gets hurt." The tension in the room shifted. What had seemed like an opportunity for advancement now also carried a shadow of threat. Tessa realized that the training program wasn't just a chance for recognition or skill development. It was a crucible, and the stakes had just become deadly serious. Cutter leaned in slightly, his voice almost a whisper. "We'll figure it out, together." Tessa nodded again, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming. But her mind was already racing, strategizing, planning. Someone had tried to kill soldiers today, and she knew instinctively the enemy was closer than anyone realized. As they left the tent, Hale's parting words lingered. "Prepare yourselves. This is going to test everything you've got physically, mentally, emotionally. There's no turning back now." Outside, the sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the training yard. Tessa glanced back at the collapsed tower, the debris still scattered and chaotic. Her fingers flexed, wrists aching slightly from the tape, muscles tense. She felt a strange mix of anticipation and fear. The offer had been made. She had accepted. But the real test, the one that would push her past anything she had endured before, was just beginning. And Cutter, walking beside her, realized something he hadn't admitted in years. He had just met someone who could challenge him in ways he had never imagined. Someone who could not only survive what was coming next, but thrive in it. For Tessa Morgan, the offer was no longer just about opportunity. It was about survival, responsibility, and proving to herself that she could carry the weight, whatever that weight might be. And as the sky turned from gold to crimson, Cutter and Tessa walked back toward the base, the unspoken understanding between them clear. The real danger hadn't begun yet. And when it did, only the strongest, smartest, and most resilient would survive. The sun had set over Fort Polk, casting long shadows across the base. The training yard, which had been alive with drills and exercises just hours before, was now eerily quiet. Only the distant hum of vehicles and the occasional bark of a sergeant broke the silence. Cutter and Tessa walked side by side toward the command building, the weight of the day pressing on both of them. Inside, the room smelled of coffee, paper, and tension. Officers and investigators had gathered, poring over preliminary reports, photographs, and measurements from the collapsed obstacle tower. The mood was serious, tight, like the taut string of a bow ready to release. Hale motioned for them to join a table covered in documents and diagrams. "We've had a preliminary review of the collapse," he said, his tone measured but urgent. "Initial signs point to tampering. The support beams were not compromised by where someone deliberately weakened them." Tessa's jaw tightened. Her eyes scanned the schematics with intense focus. Every measurement, every angle, every stress point, she absorbed it like a puzzle, her mind moving faster than the room could process. Cutter watched her, impressed despite himself. This wasn't just instinctive strength. This was strategy, analysis, and intuition rolled into one. "Someone had to have access," Hale continued. "This wasn't an accident. The screws were loosened, the brackets weakened. It required knowledge and planning." Cutter leaned back, crossing his arms. "So we're looking at someone with technical know-how, access to the equipment, and motive. Could be internal, could be external. But whoever it is, they're bold and dangerous." Tessa's eyes flicked to him. "Dangerous how?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but Cutter detected the subtle tension in her posture. She was ready not just to observe, but to act. "Someone willing to risk the lives of soldiers to cover their own tracks," Cutter said bluntly. "That's dangerous." Tessa's gaze returned to the schematics. Her mind raced through scenarios, every possibility accounted for, which soldiers had access, who had motive, what tools were available. "We need to recreate the sequence," she said. "Beam placement, weight distribution, timing. If we understand exactly how it collapsed, we can figure out who could have engineered it." Hale nodded. "We've secured the tower and surrounding area. You'll have full access. But understand this, discretion is crucial. The last thing we want is panic spreading across the base." Tessa stood abruptly, moving to a whiteboard. She began sketching diagrams of the tower, labeling angles, stress points, and points of failure. Cutter followed, offering input when asked, but mostly observing her methodical approach. Hours passed. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the room as fluorescent lights flickered above. Tessa moved with precision, her calculations meticulous, her focus unbroken. Cutter noticed something remarkable. Her eyes scanned the diagrams as if she could see the collapse in real time, mentally lifting and lowering beams, predicting failures and testing solutions. Finally, she spoke. "It wasn't just one point of failure. Whoever did this didn't just weaken a single bracket. They created a chain reaction. Someone engineered the collapse to look accidental but made sure the timing would maximize damage. Hale's eyebrows rose. You're saying it was intentional, calculated? Tessa nodded. Exactly. And the person responsible knows the base, knows the equipment, and understands structural mechanics. That narrows it down. Cutter spoke, voice low, almost to himself. That leaves very few people, and if they were willing to try this once, he let the sentence hang, heavy with implication. Tessa's eyes met his. They'll try again if we don't stop them. Hale rubbed his chin, concern etched on his face. We need to act fast. We can't afford another collapse, accidental or not. Tessa and Cutter left the command building and headed back to the training yard. The night was cool now, a stark contrast to the day's heat, but the tension was palpable. The tower loomed ahead, dark and silent, a looming reminder of how close disaster had come. Tessa crouched near the base, examining the broken beams with a flashlight. Cutter watched from a few steps back, admiring her focus. Every crack, every splinter, every bent metal support was studied as if she could extract the story directly from the debris. She knew what she was doing, Tessa muttered almost to herself. Every force accounted for, every weak point exploited. Whoever did this wasn't sloppy, they were deliberate. Cutter nodded. And that makes them dangerous. They planned this to fail exactly the way it did. Tessa's hands moved deftly over a bent bracket. She held it up, comparing it to the diagram she had sketched earlier. This bracket, loosened here, slightly bent, adjusted to fail under weight. It's subtle, but anyone trained to notice would see it. Cutter's pulse quickened. So we're looking for someone with both access and skill, and inside knowledge. Yes, Tessa said, her tone firm. And the question is why? Motive matters. You can't risk lives without a reason. They worked silently for a while, moving through calculations, observations, and potential suspects. Cutter realized something chilling. The sabotage wasn't just a random act. It was targeted, precise, and personal in some way. Finally, Tessa straightened. I have a lead, she said, voice quiet but sharp. One of the supply officers had access to these brackets recently. Only 3 people handled them, and only one of them had the technical knowledge to make them fail in this precise way. Cutter's eyes narrowed. Who? Tessa hesitated for a fraction of a second. Lieutenant Harris. He's been here long enough to know the routines, the equipment, and the schedules. He also has a history, questionable decisions, cover-ups. If this was intentional, he's our prime suspect. Hale's face darkened. We'll need concrete proof before we confront him. Any false accusation could escalate this. Tessa nodded. Agreed. But we also need to observe him, gather evidence, and make sure no one else is at risk. If he suspects we're onto him, he could act again. Cutter's hands clenched. Then we move fast, no mistakes. Lives are on the line. Tessa's eyes gleamed in the dim light. The danger, the challenge, the necessity of action. It awakened something she had long kept contained. Survival wasn't enough anymore. She wanted justice, accountability, and to prevent another disaster. As they prepared to leave the yard, Tessa glanced back at the collapsed tower. The broken beams, the bent metal, the splintered wood, it wasn't just debris. It was a warning. Someone had tested the limits of their strength, and the consequences had nearly been fatal. Cutter caught her glance. You're ready, he said, voice low. You know what needs to be done. She nodded. I know, and whoever did this, they won't get another chance. The night air was thick with tension, the faint sounds of distant traffic and occasional radio chatter mixing with the pounding of adrenaline in their veins. Every step toward uncovering the truth felt heavier than the last. And as they disappeared into the shadows of the base, the unspoken understanding between them was clear. The sabotage was only the beginning. Because someone on Fort Polk had just crossed a line. And Tessa Morgan, the woman who had lifted the impossible, was about to face her greatest challenge yet. The night at Fort Polk was suffocating. heavy with the weight of unanswered questions and the electric tension of imminent danger. Tessa Morgan moved silently through the shadows of the supply area, Cutter just a few steps behind, his senses on high alert. Every creak of a metal panel, every distant bark of a drill sergeant, even the faint rustle of wind through the trees felt amplified, like the base itself was holding its breath. Hale had approved a discreet surveillance operation. Tessa's mind raced as she reviewed the intel. Lieutenant Harris had access, motive, and the technical skill to sabotage the tower. But this wasn't just about catching him. It was about ensuring no one else was put in danger while they gathered evidence. Every step had to be calculated, every move precise. Cutter watched her, a mix of admiration and unease churning in his chest. He had seen soldiers perform under pressure, but Tessa operated on a different level, instinctive, analytical, unflinching. And yet, there was a quiet intensity, a fire beneath her calm exterior, that made him realize the stakes were higher than anyone had predicted. "Stay close," Cutter whispered, his hand brushing against the side of his holster. "He's dangerous and smart, if he suspects we're on him." "I know," Tessa replied, her eyes scanning the area. "He won't suspect the obvious." They approached the storage hangar where Harris often worked late, meticulously reviewing equipment. The building loomed in the darkness, its corrugated metal sides reflecting the faint glow of security lights. Inside, shadows shifted, a figure bent over a workbench, hands moving with practiced precision. Tessa crouched behind a stack of crates, motioning Cutter down. "That's him," she said softly. Her fingers traced the edges of the crates, almost instinctively measuring angles and lines of sight. "We need proof, video, fingerprints, or confession, something concrete." Cutter nodded. "Let's move." They edged closer, silent as ghosts, until Tessa spotted a small set of tools on Harris, workbench, bent brackets, screwdrivers, and a notebook filled with precise measurements. She crouched lower, taking in every detail. Cutter watched as she scanned the room like a predator analyzing prey. "Look at this," Tessa murmured, pointing to the notebook. "All the calculations for the collapse. Timing, weight distribution, sequence of failure, it's here. He planned it." Cutter felt a chill run down his spine. "So it's deliberate, no mistake." Tessa's eyes narrowed. She had predicted this moment, mentally rehearsing every possible confrontation. Harris had made a miscalculation, he underestimated her, and Cutter, despite his experience, had underestimated her too. Suddenly Harris straightened and glanced toward a security light. His eyes flicked in their direction, sharp, calculating, and dangerous. He wasn't just aware, he was preparing. Tessa reacted instantly. "He's onto us," she hissed. Cutter moved beside her, both flattening against the crates as Harris stepped forward, reaching for a radio. "No," Cutter whispered, realizing the potential consequences if Harris alerted others. Tessa's mind raced. She could confront him physically, but she needed evidence first, and she needed to prevent him from escaping. Her hands flexed at her sides, muscles coiled and ready, heart pounding but steady. Harris began speaking into the radio, his voice low but urgent. Cutter took a deep breath, ready to intervene. But before he could move, Tessa stepped out of the shadows with a fluid motion, her presence commanding attention. "Lieutenant Harris," she said, voice sharp and unwavering. "Step away from the radio, now." Harris froze, eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" Tessa took another step forward, her posture firm, unyielding. "I suggest you explain yourself, calmly and truthfully, or things will get much worse for you." Harris laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't reach his eyes. "And you are?" "Someone who doesn't underestimate strength," Tessa replied. "Physical, mental, or moral." Cutter stepped beside her, quietly nodding to her. Harris now faced both of them, the seasoned SEAL and the extraordinary corporal who had lifted what only elite soldiers could carry. Harris' hands twitched toward the workbench, toward tools he might use as weapons. Cutter's instincts flared. But Tessa didn't flinch. Her eyes never left his, calculating every move. "You don't understand," Harris said, his tone a mix of fear and arrogance. "It was necessary. The tower, it had to fail. Protocol demanded it." "Protocol?" Tessa's voice was sharp, incredulous. "People could have died. You risked lives for what? A cover-up, a petty score." Harris' facade cracked, his confidence wavering. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," Tessa said, her hands flexed, body poised, eyes locked on his. "And I know enough to make sure no one else gets hurt. That's what I do. That's who I am." Cutter, seeing the tension reach its peak, placed a hand on Harris' shoulder. "Step back from the workbench. Calm down, you're done." Harris hesitated, then slowly complied, eyes darting between Tessa and Cutter. There was fear now, but also stubborn defiance. Tessa reached the workbench and lifted the notebook. "These calculations," she said, flipping through the pages, "are evidence. Every detail, every step you planned. And it's going to be reviewed by command." Harris' jaw tightened. "You don't have the right." Tessa interrupted, voice icy. "I have the right to stop someone who intentionally endangered lives. And right now, that's you." Cutter stepped forward, signaling the security team outside. "Command knows everything now. Any resistance will only make it worse for you." Harris looked around, realizing the gravity of his situation. The defiance drained from his face, replaced by something raw: fear, anger, desperation. And in that instant, Tessa understood. He hadn't anticipated anyone like her. He hadn't anticipated someone who combined strength, intelligence, and moral clarity in equal measure. Hale and a small security team arrived moments later, quietly but decisively taking control. Harris was detained without incident. The evidence was secure. The threat was neutralized, at least for now. Tessa turned to Cutter, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "It's over," she said softly. Cutter shook his head, a mix of admiration and disbelief on his face. "Not over, not yet. That was closer than most people survive. But you handled it perfectly. Unflinching, precise, smart." Tessa's eyes softened briefly, a flicker of emotion breaking through her calm exterior. "I didn't do it for praise. I did it because someone had to." Cutter smiled faintly. "And that's why you're extraordinary. Not just because of strength, but because of how you think, how you act when the pressure is highest." Outside, the base was quiet again, but the tension lingered, like an echo of what had almost happened. Tessa and Cutter walked away from the hangar, side by side, knowing this confrontation was only one chapter of a larger story. Because someone had crossed a line at Fort Polk. And the woman who had lifted the impossible had just made it clear. Anyone who threatened lives under her watch would face consequences they hadn't imagined. The night air was thick, charged with anticipation. Tessa's mind was already processing the events, calculating next steps, considering threats and contingencies. Cutter knew she was far from finished, and that whoever thought they could outmatch her strength, intelligence, or resolve was gravely mistaken. And deep down, he realized something he hadn't admitted before. This woman wasn't just remarkable, she was unstoppable. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Tessa Morgan arrived at the SEAL evaluation compound. The air smelled of salt, sweat, and diesel, the unmistakable scent of elite military operations. Cutter walked beside her, their steps in rhythm, but the weight of anticipation between them was palpable. Today wasn't just another day of training. It was a crucible designed to push human limits, and Tessa knew it. The briefing room was stark, the walls adorned with photographs of past SEAL operations, medals, and names etched in honor. A group of evaluators, all former operators, stood at the front, their gaze sharp, assessing everyone as though they were prey on a field. Cutter squeezed Tessa's shoulder lightly, a silent message. "Stay focused, trust your instincts." The lead instructor, Commander Riley, a grizzled veteran with eyes like steel, stepped forward. "Welcome," he said, voice calm but carrying authority. You've been chosen for evaluation because you've demonstrated skills beyond the ordinary. But this program will strip you to the bone physically, mentally, and emotionally. Those who cannot handle it do not pass. Survival, precision, and adaptability are not optional. Tessa absorbed the words, her jaw tight. She had already faced life-and-death situations, both in Montana and at Fort Polk, but this was different. Every fiber of her being screamed challenge. She thrived under pressure, yet she knew the tests ahead would be merciless. The first phase was physical endurance. Heavy packs, timed obstacle courses, swimming drills in frigid waters. Cutter watched as Tessa pushed through, muscles straining, heart pounding, yet every movement was controlled, precise, almost elegant. While most soldiers struggled to maintain form, she seemed to flow, anticipating each obstacle, adjusting mid-motion, reading the course like a map. The evaluators whispered among themselves, "She's not just strong, she's methodical." Tessa ignored them. Her focus was singular. Every obstacle was a puzzle, every movement a calculation. Rope climbs, wall scaling, tire flips, all conquered without hesitation, without panic. Cutter noticed the faint glimmer of admiration in Riley's eyes, though no praise would be given aloud. In this world, results spoke louder than words. By midday, the evaluation transitioned into mental challenges. Problem-solving under extreme duress, encrypted communications, navigation without tools, simulated hostage rescues. Tessa's ability to remain calm under stress amazed Cutter. Where others panicked, she calculated, prioritized, and executed with surgical precision. One scenario involved a collapsed bridge with simulated casualties beneath it. Evaluators timed every decision, every action. Tessa assessed structural integrity, calculated the weight distribution of debris, and directed her teammates with clarity. Cutter's pulse quickened as he watched. She moved decisively, lifting and directing while minimizing risk, a level of leadership and instinct that few men could achieve. During a break, Cutter approached her. "You're pushing beyond limits even SEALs struggle with," he said. "Are you okay?" Tessa wiped sweat from her brow, her breathing steady but heavy. "Limits are relative," she said softly. "They're meant to be tested, redefined. I'm not done." Afternoon brought the most grueling test: endurance under isolation and fear. Evaluators staged a nighttime exercise simulating ambushes, confined spaces, and extreme psychological stress. Each candidate was given minimal supplies and forced to navigate a course designed to break confidence. Tessa entered the first chamber dark, claustrophobic, with the faint sounds of gunfire and screams. Her training from Montana, the obstacles of her past, and the collapse at Fort Polk all merged into instinct. Her heart rate remained controlled, eyes sharp, every movement calculated. Cutter watched from a monitoring station, biting his lip, knowing that few could survive this phase without faltering. Minutes stretched into hours. Candidates failed, froze, or panicked under simulated threats. But Tessa pressed forward, solving problems, evading traps, and protecting her teammates. Her mind worked faster than her body, anticipating danger before it manifested, adjusting constantly. Cutter felt his chest tighten. He had never seen such combination of instinct, intelligence, and physical capability. The final trial was the most feared. A live extraction scenario involving actors posing as hostiles, booby traps, and timed objectives. The evaluation pushed every candidate to their limits: exhaustion, fear, and cognitive overload. Tessa moved like a shadow, her team responding seamlessly to her commands. A particularly dangerous section involved a narrow bridge over water rigged with motion-triggered alarms and obstacles. Candidates had failed here before, often falling or triggering alarms that counted as immediate failure. Tessa approached cautiously, assessing each plank, calculating weight distribution, timing her steps with precision. Cutter watched, pulse racing, as she crossed flawlessly, maintaining balance and control while signaling her teammates forward. One of the evaluators whispered to another, "I've never seen anyone move like that under pressure. She's exceptional. But Tessa didn't hear. Her focus was singular, completing the objective without error, ensuring safety and proving to herself that she belonged here. This wasn't about recognition. It was survival, mastery, and pushing the boundaries of human capability. The scenario climaxed with a simulated explosive trap. The team had seconds to disarm it, relying on Tessa's commands. Her hands moved decisively, cutting wires with a steady hand, giving precise orders to her teammates. Cutter could hardly believe the calm precision in her voice, even as simulated explosions shook the chamber. When the timer hit 0, the scenario ended success. Tessa's team had completed every objective flawlessly, surviving every simulation, every obstacle, and every psychological test. She stepped out, chest heaving, eyes bright with the adrenaline of victory and the awareness that she had just conquered one of the most demanding evaluations on Earth. Commander Riley stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Corporal Morgan, you have exceeded every expectation. Few have demonstrated this combination of physical, mental, and strategic capability. Fewer still have done so without hesitation or error." Tessa nodded quietly, exhausted but unbroken. Cutter stepped beside her, pride and awe written across his face. "I told you," he murmured. "You're unstoppable." Riley continued, his tone measured but firm. "You will advance to the next phase of selection. This is where only the strongest survive, where instincts, intelligence, and moral clarity are tested under conditions most cannot endure. You've proven yourself capable, but remember, the real challenges are just beginning." Tessa's gaze met Cutter. "I'm ready," she said, voice steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. "No one else gets hurt under my watch. I won't let it happen." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows over the compound, Tessa and Cutter walked toward the evaluation headquarters. Every step was deliberate, every movement purposeful. The trials had tested them, honed their instincts, and proven their resolve. But Tessa knew the greatest challenge wasn't behind her, it was ahead. The elite program was only the beginning, and somewhere beyond the shadows of the compound, threats still lurked. And she was ready to face them. Because strength wasn't just measured in pounds lifted or obstacles conquered. Strength was courage, resilience, and the ability to rise again when everything tried to break you. And Tessa Morgan had just proven she had more than enough of all three. The final day of the elite evaluation program arrived under a gray, overcast sky. Rain had left the ground slick, the smell of wet earth and salt mixing with the metallic tang of sweat and equipment. Tessa Morgan stood at the starting line of the last trial, Cutter beside her, both tense but unbroken. This was more than an obstacle course or endurance test. This was the culmination of everything she had endured, every challenge, every near-death moment, every doubt she had faced since Montana, Fort Polk, and the collapsed tower. Commander Riley approached, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "This final trial is the ultimate test. Physical strength, mental agility, leadership, and moral judgment will all be evaluated under conditions designed to push you beyond human limits. Few have completed it. Fewer still have done so without error. Are you ready?" Tessa's chest rose and fell steadily. "Yes, sir." Cutter watched her carefully. "Remember, Morgan, it's not just about brute strength. It's about precision, judgment, and timing. You've already proven you can lift what most cannot. Now prove you can lead, think, and survive under total chaos." The trial began. Explosions echoed in the distance. Simulated gunfire cracked through the air, and smoke bombs created a haze that obscured vision. Tessa's team was disoriented, panicked, and exhausted, but she remained composed, issuing commands with calm authority. Every movement was deliberate, every decision precise. The first phase involved a simulated hostage scenario. Actors played hostages, some visibly panicked, others pretending to be casualties. Tessa approached with measured caution, assessing threats, positioning her team and neutralizing hostiles with efficiency. Cutter's eyes followed her movements in awe. Her leadership was instinctive, yet methodical, blending empathy with tactical precision. Next came a technical obstacle. A narrow steel bridge spanned a simulated chasm, rigged with pressure sensors that would trigger alarms if misstepped. Tessa calculated each step, gauging weight distribution and balance. Her team followed her lead, every motion synchronized, each decision executed flawlessly. Cutter noted the faint tremor in her arms. Fatigue had begun to creep in, but she didn't falter. By the time they reached the extraction simulation, darkness had fallen, shadows stretching like fingers across the compound. The team faced a maze of obstacles, booby traps, and hostile actors. Panic threatened to ripple through her squad, but Tessa's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. Left flank slow, right flank cover, move as one, watch each other, every step counts. Her instructions were precise, unyielding, yet reassuring. Cutter could see the team's confidence stabilize under her guidance, a testament not just to her physical ability, but her psychological control in life-and-death situations. The final challenge was the most feared, the gear lift. Each candidate had to carry a weighted pack that only SEAL operators could normally manage across a treacherous terrain under simulated combat conditions. The weight wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. For Tessa, it was the culmination of every burden she had carried in her life: responsibility, fear, loss, and the constant fight to prove herself. She bent beneath the pack, feeling the crushing weight settle across her shoulders and back. Cutter watched, breath caught in his throat. Her muscles tensed, spine aligned, core engaged. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted and moved forward. The course tested her limits at every step. Mud sucked at her boots, rain poured into her eyes, and smoke stung her lungs. Her hands slipped on ropes, rocks shifted beneath her feet, yet she pressed onward, every motion calculated, every breath controlled. Cutter followed closely, ready to intervene if she faltered, but she didn't. Minutes stretched, each one an eternity. Tessa's vision blurred, her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but the determination in her eyes never wavered. She wasn't carrying just a pack. She was carrying the culmination of her life's trials, the weight of proving herself to a world that doubted her strength, courage, and resolve. Finally, she reached the finish line. Exhausted, soaked, and trembling from exertion, she lowered the pack gently to the ground. For a heartbeat, silence held, evaluators, instructors, and fellow candidates staring at her in awe. Few had completed the course. Few were still with flawless execution under maximum pressure. Commander Riley stepped forward, expression unreadable at first. Then slowly he nodded. "Corporal Morgan, you have demonstrated an extraordinary combination of strength, intelligence, leadership, and moral clarity. You have faced challenges designed to break the strongest operators, and you have not only endured, you have excelled." Tessa's chest heaved, but she remained silent, catching her breath, letting the words sink in. Cutter's hand landed lightly on her shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "I told you you're unstoppable." Riley continued, "You are hereby recognized as fully qualified for Joint Special Operations, capable of operating at the highest levels of strategic and physical demand. Few have achieved what you have today, Corporal. Few ever will." The room erupted into muted applause, candidates and evaluators alike acknowledging her achievement. Tessa allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She didn't need the recognition, but she understood its significance. Validation, yes, but also a warning. The responsibilities she had accepted carried real stakes, lives, missions, and the ever-present shadow of danger. Hale appeared, stepping through the compound's gates, his eyes filled with pride and relief. "Morgan," he said, voice firm but warm, "today proves what we've known for a long time. You are exceptional. Your strength, both physical and moral, has saved lives, uncovered threats, and now placed you among the elite." Tessa nodded, acknowledging him, but her mind already shifted. Recognition was temporary. The real work, the protection, the leadership, the vigilance would continue. Cutter noticed the faint hardening of her gaze. She wasn't finished. She never was. As they walked through the compound toward the base, rain washing over them, Cutter spoke. You know this isn't the end, right? New missions, higher stakes. People who want to test limits or cross lines will come. Tessa's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. I know, and I'll be ready always. They reached the edge of the compound. Beyond lay unknown challenges, threats, and missions that would push them to extremes. But for now, Tessa allowed herself a moment to feel the weight lift, not the literal pack, but the burden of proving herself over and over, of surviving, of being recognized for what she could truly do. And yet, as she looked across the horizon, Cutter noticed a flicker in her eyes, alertness, awareness, and perhaps even anticipation. Someone somewhere still posed a threat. The collapse at Fort Polk, the sabotage, the tests, these were only the beginning. For Tessa Morgan, the recognition was monumental, but the mission never ended. Strength, intelligence, courage, they were tools, weapons, and shields all at once, and she had mastered them. Cutter smiled faintly, ready to see what comes next. Tessa lifted her chin, determination blazing. Always. As the sun disappeared entirely, the rain-soaked landscape shimmering in the dim light, one truth was clear. She had lifted what no one else could, survived what most would have failed, and now carried a legacy few could match. And the world, dangerous, uncertain, and merciless, would never forget the woman who could carry it all. Because she was extraordinary. And she was just getting started.